In Africa, we call them the elders. Learned men with broad knowledge across multiple disciplines, people who've lived a bit, done some things, and have a message for the youth. Today, we start a conversation with one such elder, Dr. Mike Williams, about living a life by design and not by default. Tune in. And I rise like the day I rise up. All right, so Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, and how you came to this realization?
Sure. I'm, as mentioned, Michael Williams. I say that intentionally because the Williams is significant in how I came to be. Born and raised in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is the third largest city in the state of Louisiana next to New Orleans and Baton Rouge. In the early 60s, growing up, that was a time where stark differences exist between how black folks lived and how white folks lived, with segregation in full force, seeing the differences between the quality of life, of material life at least, of housing and community and schools, how they looked in our communities and how different they looked in other communities. All of that created a sense of inquiry for me to wonder why. And going through my educational years of K through 12 and even through college, that inquiry was always there and even got stronger to question the whyness of these kinds of things existing. What caused the questions to become so profound for me is that I grew up in a very deeply religious Christian home, National Baptist to be specific. Grandfather, deacon, grandmother, the singer of the choir, go to Sunday school, church, all of that, and hear the lessons of Christ and Christianity, and preachers preaching just phenomenal sermons on Sundays, and then to hear such powerful witness of a God who can do great things, and walking out of church and looking at our community and saying, then why can't God do something about this? you know, uh, that caused me to really start getting into theology and wondering just what did it all mean, and that drove me down a path to where, in the South, I would say I received a calling right out of college to preach, and that calling is where this kind of unction within you that you feel God is moving you to do something and to be more in ministry than where you were. And so, at the age of 24, I ended up entering ministry, the Christian ministry. The most profound thing that happened to me was, after I preached my first sermon, which is called a trial sermon down in Louisiana, to get your license to be a minister. I preached it that Sunday evening, and then that Monday morning, my mom died. And so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that questioning of God started getting a little bit more deeper, and just wondering what the heck is all this all about, and why would you do something like that? So it didn't take long for me to realize Louisiana was not the place that I was supposed to be. And so I migrated to Connecticut in 1987, entered into theological studies, grew in ministry, ordained in Connecticut, then started pastoring churches, mostly in the United Church of Christ, and all centered around issues of social justice and looking at the Gospels from that perspective. So that's me historically. That's how I got here.
All right, so why don't you tell us or explain? I'm trying to wrap my head around this concept. What do you mean when you say living by design, not by default?
Yeah, thanks. Because it is one that requires, some intentionality, right? And I'll give you this journey of mine to explain it. So I always preach from the perspective of faith, right? Faith and hope, and encouraging people to have a relationship with God based on faith. And what I discovered in doing that with folks was the fact that people tend to wait for God to act and kind of sit in the back seat, not even the passenger seat up front, but in the back seat saying, I have faith God's going to do it, and God, wake me up when you get there, and not necessarily active in their own life choice or life desires. People kind of wanting something, wanting to do something in life, wanting to be something in life, but really not actively designing the path to get there, having faith and hope that God would take them there. And so with that, there are three levels of relating to God that I can offer that can help explain this. And that first one is the hope relationship. And then that second relationship is the faith relationship. The third relationship is where I try to move people to get to, and that will create this sense of designing, and that is the knowing relationship. So there's a big difference between knowing God and having faith in God. Knowing God is based on the manna story of the Israelites in the wilderness, where they're hungry and wanting to eat, and there's no food. They just left Egypt, and they're all angry and blaming Moses and his brother. How dare you bring us out here to die? Even though we were enslaved in Egypt, we at least ate something. All of that. And so to solve that dilemma, what God did for them was, God said, sit down and I'm going to teach you this lesson. Every day, I'm going to rain down manna from heaven. Right? Every day it will come. You shall eat it. Mm-hmm. But you cannot save it because it will spoil. Mm-hmm. So don't try to put it in your refrigerator. Don't try to put it in the bank account. Don't try to accumulate it. Mm-hmm. Just enjoy what I will give you every day. Mm-hmm. And when it's gone, know that it will come again tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And on the Sabbath, I will rain down enough that could last for 2 days. Mm-hmm. So because you can't work on the Sabbath, mm-hmm. right? Or the day before the Sabbath. The moral of the story is, can you get to a point where you live your life knowing that that was going to happen the next day? Mm-hmm. Can you know that manna was really going to come down? Mm-hmm. Those who didn't believe it obviously would die out. Mm-hmm. Those who believed it would live their life without worrying about what I shall eat, because I know God will send me manna. Mm-hmm. That's a knowing relationship. And so living by design is based on creating within one's own imagination the vision of what they want for their lives. Mm-hmm. First step is developing that vision, seeing what it is that you want that you don't have, or where it is you want to go that you're not at yet. Creating that for yourself rather than waiting for somebody to create it for you, or sitting back waiting for something to happen and you say, well, that's what God meant for me, instead of that's what I wanted for myself, right? And once you lock into, that vision, know that that is where God will take you. And God then will act on your knowledge of his actions towards you. What I learned about God is that God is one who will give you exactly what you say you want. And if what you say you want is to sit right here in the wilderness and not be free, you will sit right there in the wilderness and not be free. If all you say you want is a lifestyle that's way below your means, or way below your potential, or way below what can actually have, then that is what you will get. It's where people can choose to allow the circumstances that cause us pain, grief, enslavement, victimization, and all of that define us and stay there, or say that happened to me, but it's not going to stop me. It didn't get into me, though it happened to me. And what I want for myself is not going to be hindered by what others try to do to me. The fact that people can tell folks who are poor, because you are poor, you can't do something, and limit their visions of what they want and what they can have, is one of the most devastating things to do to children. I have a grandson, and love him to death. And I remember when he started, he's a third grader now. And I remember when he started school, the boy was phenomenal, right? Knew how to read, knew everything. Everybody said about their kids, right? Yeah, so he was awesome, man. And I remember I gave him a nickname because I said, man, I used to always tell him, you're just gifted, you're smart, you're smart. Throw in with equations, mathematics, and all that. He just knock it out the park. And I was like, dude, the reason why you're so smart is because you got a big brain. Your brain is larger than everyone else's. That's why it makes you be able to answer these tough questions. And so from then on, my nickname for him is Big Brain, like Big Brain Addy, Big Brain Addy. This boy believed he has a big brain. He believed that to this day, and he's a third grader performing at a seventh grade level and all that stuff. And I remember he got an award at school, and the teacher asked him about why he was so smart. He said, because I have a big brain. Like what? All that to say, if you tell somebody, something about what they can do, if you set, particularly a child to believe something, and that belief turns into knowing, children will do some phenomenal things, and so will adults.
So how do you reconcile this to the state of Black people today in America? Do you think that faith has helped them or hurt them, or do you think it's basically a non-issue as it relates to the struggles that you face?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. I would say the best question. It's a great question because I have to think about it all the time when we talk about Black folks and moving forward. I think that what we had and the experience that we had and the environment that we were in the past, the faith back then was good for back then. It's kind of like a rung on the ladder. And now it's time to move up the ladder. And you can't do that staying on the same rung. You got to start shifting and climbing and doing different things. Yeah, and some would say, well, God is a God who don't change, but we do, and God is big enough to allow us to experience and thank him for what he did for us in the past. And that same God can say, and what I will do for you in the future is this, and this is how it will look. I think we have been seduced by the past that we romanticize so much. And we have been, in a sense, deluded by some of the gospels that's preaching out there and faith that's preaching out there a false hope and reality based on a Christianity that's not real. And, it's a bit controversial to say that, but that's my belief. I think the Western theologies in particular and the American-based Christianity has done more harm to black people than help. And until we can break away from this kind of prosperity, materialistic, market-based belief in a deity that has often been portrayed on the side of the oppressor and not those who are oppressed,
Yes.
that have often been the source of tyranny and exploitation in the name of Jesus, all that. Until we can get away from that, we will be stuck in the wilderness, waiting for, by default, a miracle to come and deliver us. When the deliverance has already happened, we just got to take it over.
And do you perceive yourself as a theist, a deist? How do you reconcile your views about God now with, not that you have to label yourself, but it's sometimes easier for people to consume. How do you reconcile yourself and your beliefs with those kinds of, I guess, titles or labels?
Right. Yeah, no, I search around to figure out which one I am, and not try to put a label on. I'm more of a mystic, in moving towards, the mysticism of Christianity. That kind of what Brother Howard Thurman was when he was at his latter part of life. Seeing that the God that we worship is one God, one source, all things emanating from the one, and the one God is in all things, in everyone. There's no separation between us and God. The some would like to preach that we are separate from God and need that bridge to get us back and all that. I don't believe that. I think we are. I believe and know that the God that is in you is the same God that is in me, and the self that we call ourselves will always stay connected to that one God. The Messiah Christian based belief that has been dominant in our culture has a role, but it's more, instead of a pie in the sky that everything happens afterwards. It's more of saying your salvation, saving yourself, is based on you waking up and realizing who you are and developing a Christian, Christ-centered mindset around living towards your spiritual being and not towards your physical self. And once you, as the Paul would have wrote, once you move out of the body and live towards the spirit, then one can experience the liberation that comes with that way of being, and that's through mysticism.
Now, I spoke to an African spiritualist, and he made a statement to me that I found to be troubling, if not profound. He said that the anthropomorphized God, right? So the idea of this interactive, God that's aware of you and that you're speaking to, is as preposterous as the idea of a river being anthropomorphized, right? That you wouldn't say, hey, the river did this, the river did that. You just see the river as a force that has this positive view on you, or positive effect on you. What are your thoughts on this idea of disambiguating God from, this personified view that, that's been pervasive, I think, for years and years?
Yeah, that is the first step of spiritual liberation. Once we understand that God is not human, God's not male nor female, God's not even object. You know, God is spirit, and spirit is like air. You can't see it. You can't grab it. You can't, put it in a jar and say, "Here's air," you know, to where it's visible, but you know it's there. You know that it's vital for the life force to exist, because no one can live without air to breathe. And so that's who God is. And that label, even the word God, can be questioned because it's a derivation of a Scottish word compared to what the deity is called across the globe, right? And so the anthropomorphic way of seeing God has been the cause of enslaving many people, because once you do that, you violate the first uh, uh, um, commandment, where thou shalt not make any graven image in the 10 Commandments that Moses received. I don't know if the first one was one of them. That thou shalt not make any graven image or likeness of me, no statues, because I'm too big for your mind to even conceive, to try to narrow me down to a statue or a sculpture or anything and say, here's God, and the temptation for human to make God into their image rather than be into God's image has always been there, right? And so once we see ourselves in God's image, it requires us to then say, what is the image then of the God that I see myself in? And that's when I get to the image is spirit, which is within us, right? And when you realize that you are a spiritual being having a human experience, that lets you stay connected to the spirit that you came from, or that we're one with, which is the one God. And so no doctor, no x-ray machines, nothing has ever diagnosed or put a person on any one of the technologies that are out there and say, oh, that's a spirit. We can see it, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you can't see it, just like you can't see God, but inside of every person is spirit, right? And that spirit is connected to everyone is connected to each other and to the spirit of God that we all come from, the one God that we all come from. And so when our earthly bodies end and have to go away, what continues to live on in us is the spirit. Therefore, we are to make ourselves in the image of God, not make God in our image. And anthropomorphic systems created that image to say, God looks like me.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you don't look like me, then God is not on your side. And if God is on my side, that means I can do to you whatever I want. I can abuse you, I can oppress you, I can take your land, I can enslave your people, all forms of tyranny I can conduct upon you, because God is on my side, because God looks like me and not like you.
I think one of the biggest criticisms for religion as a whole is some of the atrocities that apparently God is responsible for, right? Many of them in the Bible. There's the command to destroy Jericho and kill everybody, put salt on the earth, and all that stuff. There's the various mass terror attacks that happen in Egypt right before they are set free, and it very much, if you read the Old Testament, builds up this us versus them view of God,
Yeah.
right? Where the Israelites are the us and everybody else is just fodder, cannon fodder, basically. How do we reconcile that view of the religion, because it's the earliest form of the religion, with today, where we say, where we say, well, I follow God, I'm a Christian, or what have you? How do those two things get married together?
Yeah, this, is probably the toughest part of our growth process as it relates to spiritual development, right? And that requires breaking away from or evolving from, whatever term one wants to use, from interpretations and beliefs derived from the biblical text that just isn't true.
Okay.
Right? And people will say, the Bible's infallible. Everything is true. Everything came from the Word of God. And I would say, no, it's not. The Bible is people who, centuries, years later, heard stories and chose to then write them down of something that happened to other people. And some of the stories, particularly in the Old Testament that's written down, are stories that aren't necessarily about the people who they're being written about, not the Israelites, the Hebrews, but they're about other folks in other ancient writings that if you go look at those writings that existed long before there was a Hebrew Bible, an Old Testament or New Testament, ages before that, and like the Sumerian texts and the Egyptian texts and all of those, you look at what their texts were saying way back then, it's the same story, different characters, right? And so it's like, wait a second, how did this person go through the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and now Noah had the flood, and it's the same story,
Yeah.
right? And so that's when you realize, okay, these stories aren't necessarily true stories as much as they are allegorical stories to prove a point. And the person's telling the story is telling it from their vantage point to make it appear as though it happened to them and God is with them in
I
the
see.
effort. So, like in this country, we love to say that it was due to manifest destiny, a theological term. God ordained us to come here and take the land from the people who lived here, right? And the folks who lived here, the indigenous people who were here, will say, that's not what our God said. We don't even believe in ownership of land. The land is that which is given for all to live on, not to own. And people definitely are not to be owned. And so whose God is right? Was it the indigenous folks who were here to say, you can come and live, but you can't take it. This is ours. Or was it the Europeans who came here to say, this is our destiny. God has given us this land, so therefore we're going to kill all you and kick you off of it and take it from you. Who's right?
Indeed, who is right?
Right. And if the God that I know is asked the question, I can almost assure you he will say, the people who were here were right. God would never do that. That's not an act of the creator God, the one source of all people, because at the basis of that one God is this essence of love, and love does not destroy one another. Love does not take things from each other. Love does not enslave one another. Love is much more powerful than that. Love uplifts humanity, shifts humanity from, hatred to being with each other in a more positive and productive way. And so if God is love and love is God, then there's no way that God would say, go over and take land from indigenous people in America, or go over and kill all the people in Jericho, or go over and do all that. No, that's your story to explain why you did what you did and and use God as the excuse, So
Now, if you look at religion as a whole, and the history of it, and you look at all the atrocities that have occurred in the past, I don't know, 2,000 years, from the lens of non-Western thinking and ideology, like if I just separated it out, would you say that most people who are not from the Western civilization that have adopted Christianity or Judeo-Christianity have committed any atrocities or done anything crazy, or would you say that they've generally adopted it from a peaceful perspective and you really sort of exemplified the message that's being taught to them?
Yeah, no, it's a way of assimilating into a Western imperialist approach, a Western imperialist country, to where you don't have to have a dictator passing laws ready to imprison you if you say something wrong. The norms can be so strong to where either you assimilate or you fall behind, and people will immediately come and assimilate in thought, assimilate in the economic exchange of capitalism, and think it's the best thing in the world. Assimilate in the style of education and say it's the best way to be educated, and then assimilate in what to believe theologically, and say, well, this is a Christian country, so I will become Christian, as a way of survival and as a way of upward mobility. There does come a point, though, and I know most folks have this crisis of faith to where they get and they wonder, what is this all about now? I've assimilated. I got my material possessions. I own this. I got a great job. I'm doing really, really well, but something's missing, right? And that which is missing is what they remembered they had when they grew up in the lands that they came from, which is a deep sense of spirit. Whereas the assimilation approach to all this was void of spirit. It was routinized, it was religiosity, and conforming to the norms of that without a spiritual connection to it all. And that's when people start to walk away and realize that I can't do this anymore. I've seen so many people who come from the islands and the Caribbeans and from the continent of Africa who have gotten to the point where they are questioning just their spirituality now and wanting more than just a Sunday morning sermon.
Yeah.
Because spirituality is a Sunday through Saturday experience, and it drives most of who you are and what you do. And how do you feed that? How do you feed that soul? If you feed it only on Sunday, you're gonna be some skinny people running around there, right?
So let's get a little bit on the controversial side, and let's talk about these societies that existed before Christianity, that Christianity borrows these concepts from. Are you talking about Egypt? Are you talking about the Sumerians? And does God extend to back then? Are they also worshiping the same God that the Israelites eventually worshiped, that the Americans and the British and everyone else, the Italians, followed suit on?
Yeah, I start with saying there are 7 universal laws. That's from the first of the universal law is the law of mentalism, right? Everything comes from the mind of God. Everything, which comports to the book of Genesis. So in the beginning there was nothing, and God created all things. So if you start there with nothing exists, never have and never will, that did not come from God. Because if there's something that exists that didn't come from God, then you have to say, then who created that? And if something else created that, now you got 2 gods, right? Which some would like to do and create a dualistic way of viewing God. But dualism is, for me at least, it is a challenge to this concept of the one God. And I choose to believe there's one God, and everything came from the mind of the one God, which is the law of mentalism. So all other societies that came, before Christianity all came from this one God, just in stages and times and the ages of time when they came, you know, may have been different, and their experiences with this one God may have been different, but they all come from the one God. So the stories then that they have and they tell within their culture, particularly the Sumerian culture, are stories of how they related to the one God and things that they did. Those stories, as I mentioned before, are often brought into other cultures. For instance, it is believed that Abraham, at the time when he was Abram, they lived in the land of Ur, he and his family, right? Which is the land of the Sumerians. So the whole Sumerian culture that I'm talking about was already in effect. So his father, Haran, they all were priests in that land, right? And he ups and he leaves. And the belief is in other writings that he runs into Thoth, and Thoth teaches him the 7 universal laws. That's where he got his kind of indoctrination into that, right? And so the thread of what was happening in Samaria migrates into Egypt with Abram before he becomes Abraham. To even push it further, he then, in the book of Genesis, goes and pays his tithe and dues and I wouldn't say worship, but gives tribute to the priest of Salem. So if Abraham is the father of faith, right, the starter of the Judeo-Christian system, why was he giving tithe and tribute to the Salem priest who is Melchizedek, right? Melchizedek was over Salem. The word Salem means, the land of peace. And the Melchizedek order became the priestly order of the Michael and Zadok put together, which created the blending of the name of Melchizedek. And then if that order was already in existence before there was Israel, Abraham clearly was a part of that order. And so what did that order teach? And then when you get to the New Testament book of Hebrews, it talks about Jesus being from a priest in the line of Melchizedek, right? And so now you have to wonder, okay, if Abraham did that with Melchizedek and the Hebrew writer says that he's from the line of Melchizedek, then what is that priesthood like? What does that faith system look like? And so that is part of the kind of the Sumerian teachings and writings in the Emerald Tablet that came over that those universal laws are based on.